Imagine for a second that you are, well, waist deep in a huge flowing river.
Which is already pretty intimidating, honestly.
Right. You are totally out of your element, moving super slowly, fighting the physical resistance of the current.
Yeah.
And then suddenly, a wild, incredibly powerful animal just approaches you.
And it doesn't attack.
Exactly. It doesn't attack.
No.
It doesn't flee either. Instead, it deliberately unbalances its own body in the water.
Surrendering, like, all its natural defenses.
Yeah, just to allow you to perform a really dangerous, delicate rescue.
It's wild.
It is. And it makes you wonder, what do you do in that exact surreal moment? Do you freeze up to protect yourself? Or do you lean into this kind of unspoken cross-species pact?
That's the big question.
Welcome to today's deep dive. We are exploring an incident that forces us to ask why a wild creature would override millions of years of evolutionary survival instinct.
Just to submit to a human.
Right. We are unpacking a really profound, hyper-specific encounter detailed in the YouTube transcript from the channel Kev Webster Coach.
Yeah, it's a beautiful video.
It really is. It's titled The Swan That Taught Me to Notice. And our mission for this deep dive is to understand how a seemingly isolated crisis out in nature can ripple outward across years.
Altering how we perceive intuition and, well, coincidence.
Yeah, and even seasonal transitions. It's so fascinating.
So to give everyone a roadmap of how we're going to tackle this, we will strictly follow the sequence of events as they unfold in Kev's story.
Right.
First, we'll dissect that initial rescue encounter on the riverbank. We really want to examine the physical and emotional mechanics of cross-species trust.
Which is a whole topic in itself.
Oh, absolutely. And then second, we'll analyze the personal reflection that happened years later.
Unpacking the dates, the symbols.
And those really powerful questions the whole thing leaves us with.
Yeah, because to understand the mechanics of this interspecies interaction, we have to look at the whole picture.
Right, we're talking about two seemingly unrelated phenomena here.
Yeah, like the physics of a swan's defensive posture.
And the really complex neuroscience of human memory encoding.
Exactly. Because the story doesn't actually begin in the water with the rescue.
No, it doesn't.
It begins years later on a completely different, quiet morning walk along a riverbank.
Right. Kev mentions the simple, everyday conversation he'd had earlier that week.
With a friend, right, about how magnificent swans are.
Yeah. And that casual social interaction, layered onto the atmosphere of his morning walk, creates a highly specific cognitive environment.
Okay, so he's walking, and he notes this very specific sensory detail that acts as the trigger for the memory.
The sound of the wings.
Yes, the distinct physical sound that swans make when they fly overhead.
It's very unique.
It is, like on a quiet riverbank, you hear them approaching from a massive distance.
Right, because it's not a vocalization.
No, it's the rhythmic, heavy thrumming of their wings beating against the air. Kind of reminds me of hearing a distant train in the dead of night,
Oh, yeah, that's a great analogy.
Or like the hum of a low-flying plane. Yeah. It just instantly pulls your awareness away from your immediate surroundings.
And connects you to this much larger, vast environment.
Right. It's almost like having a heavily encrypted file stored deep on your computer's hard drive.
Okay, I like where you're going with this.
The visual sight of the river wasn't the decryption key for Kev, but that highly specific low-frequency sound of the wings cutting through the air.
Acted as the exact key to unlock it.
Exactly. It just suddenly unlocked this dormant file in his brain.
And that analogy maps so perfectly onto the biological reality of how episodic memory works.
Oh, really? How so?
Well, the hippocampus, which is the brain's primary sorting center for memories, it doesn't file experiences chronologically.
Yeah.
It files them associatively. It binds sensory data like sound, smell, spatial awareness directly to emotional states.
Wow. So the sound of the wings is literally tied to the feeling of that day.
Precisely. And you have to remember, a swan's wing doesn't have the specialized sound dampening microfringes that, say, an owl's wing has.
Oh, right. Owls are completely silent when they fly.
Exactly. But a swan is a massive, heavy bird. They can weigh up to 30 pounds.
That is huge for a bird.
It is. So to keep that mass airborne, they have to strike the air with immense, almost violent force.
Which creates that low-frequency sound.
Right, and low-frequency sounds travel further and engage the human auditory cortex in a really primal way.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, it often bypasses higher-level filtering to speak directly to the amygdala.
So it's basically a direct hotline to the emotional center of the brain.
Exactly.
Which kind of explains why Kev admits he hadn't thought about this profound rescue story in years.
Yeah, it had just been filed away.
That detail always strikes me as so bizarre, though. I mean, if I had a life-altering encounter with a massive wild animal, I feel like I'd think about it every Tuesday.
You'd think so, right?
Yeah. How does a human brain simply shelve an event with that much emotional and adrenaline-fueled weight?
Well, the human brain is just a ruthlessly efficient machine. It's focused entirely on immediate utility.
Meaning what, exactly?
Meaning, if an event, no matter how profound it was, doesn't offer actionable data for your daily survival.
Like going to work or paying bills.
Right, or navigating social hierarchies. If it doesn't help with that, the brain represses active recall to save cognitive bandwidth.
Wow, so it's literally just saving space on the hard drive.
Exactly. Furthermore, if the original event was processed while Kev was in a state of acute hyperfocus, the memory is often encoded differently.
Oh, so it's not linked to his everyday neural pathways.
Right. It sits in isolation, entirely inaccessible until the exact right sensory architecture forces the hippocampus to retrieve it.
The quiet river, the prior conversation about swans, the sound of the wings.
It was the perfect storm for memory retrieval.
That is amazing. And that retrieval seamlessly pulls us out of the present and drops us right into the flashback.
Right, setting the scene for the standoff.
Yeah, so we are transported back to summer. Kev is fishing with his son on the River Trent in Nottingham.
And he makes a point to describe the River Trent as huge.
Yes, huge is the exact word he uses. And the spatial dynamics here feel completely critical to everything that follows.
They absolutely are.
Because Kev isn't just sitting safely on the grassy bank in a folding chair. He is waded out into the water, nearly up to his waist.
And by doing that, he fundamentally changes the power dynamic of the impending encounter.
How so?
Well, humans are bipedal, terrestrial apex predators.
Right, we belong on land.
Exactly. Our evolutionary advantage relies entirely on our mobility, our balance, and our ability to manipulate tools on solid ground.
So by getting into the river.
By entering waist-deep water, Kev has voluntarily stripped away his primary evolutionary advantages.
Oh, that makes sense, because water is so dense.
It's a medium 800 times denser than air. His movements are heavily encumbered by fluid drag.
His center of gravity is completely compromised.
Right. He has effectively entered the swan's domain, adopting a posture of extreme physical vulnerability.
He is a visitor in an alien medium.
That's a great way to put it.
And into this shared medium swims the swan. It begins swimming up and down, pacing back and forth in the water directly in front of him.
And here we get this brilliant psychological contrast immediately.
Yes. Kev's son is watching from the bank, and he calls out, "It looks like you've got a friend, Dad."
It's such a classic, innocent observation.
Totally. The child instantly anthropomorphizes the animal. But Kev, being the adult fisherman, operates on conditioned pragmatism.
Right.
His immediate logical assumption is that the bird is just loitering for scraps of food.
And what we are seeing there is the developmental arc of human threat assessment in real time.
Oh, I love that. Unpack that a bit.
Well, children utilize a deeply ingrained psychological tool called theory of mind.
Okay.
They project human emotions and social narratives onto non-human entities as a way to understand the world.
So the son sees a friend.
Exactly. Kev, however, relies on pattern recognition built through years of environmental interaction.
He knows that urban and semi-urban waterfowl associate humans with food.
Right. His baseline assumption is purely transactional.
But that transactional assumption just shatters in a matter of seconds.
It does. Everything shifts.
The swan closes the distance, and the context of the environment completely flips. Kev spots a fishing line.
Oh, man.
Yeah, it's hanging from the beak, wrapped aggressively around the bird's neck, and trailing down deep under the murky water.
So immediately, the narrative shifts from a picturesque nature moment to a high-stakes crisis.
This isn't a bird begging for bread anymore. This is an animal caught in a complex, multi-point entanglement that will eventually kill it.
And Kev has this chilling realization.
The bird wants help.
The cognitive load on Kev in this specific second is just immense.
I can't even imagine.
His visual cortex registers the monofilament line, which triggers an immediate empathetic response via mirror neurons.
So he recognizes the suffering and wants to stop it.
Yes, but simultaneously, his amygdala is screaming a warning about the physics of the creature in front of him.
Because he knows exactly what he is dealing with. He explicitly notes his hesitation, acknowledging that he wasn't going to just start grabbing for it or deploying his fishing net.
Which would be a terrible idea.
Right. He cites the folklore, or maybe it's a very real biological fact, that a swan can break a human arm with a single strike of its wing.
Ah, yes. The infamous arm-breaking myth.
I actually want to challenge that, though. Is that anatomical reality? Or is it just something we tell kids to keep them away from angry birds in the park?
It's actually a mixture of anatomical reality and behavioral hyperbole.
Okay, so it's somewhere in the middle.
Yeah. A swan's wing bones, like all flying birds, are relatively hollow to reduce weight.
So a literal bone-breaking strike against a dense human arm bone is unlikely.
Highly unlikely under normal circumstances, yes.
But they are still incredibly powerful.
Oh, absolutely.
Uh-huh.
The musculature required to propel a 30-pound bird into the air is staggering.
I bet.
The dense, hard keratin of the wing joint, driven by that massive pectoral muscle, acts like a swung baseball bat.
Yikes. So even if it doesn't snap your bone, it's going to do some damage.
A strike can easily cause severe contusions, knock a human off balance, or inflict serious facial trauma.
And remember, Kev is in waist-deep water where his footing is already compromised.
Exactly. A panicked, thrashing bird of that size poses a lethal drowning risk.
So his hesitation is actually a highly calibrated, accurate risk assessment.
Without a doubt.
So put yourself in that rushing water. You're faced with the ultimate conflict between your empathetic drive to save a life and your primal survival instinct screaming at you to keep your distance.
It's a huge paradox.
Yeah, how do you help a wild creature that is in desperate need when you know that a single panicked reaction from it could physically shatter your bones or drown you?
And if you make a sudden movement, you trigger the animal's fight-or-flight response.
Right. You want to be the savior, but you are painfully aware of your own fragility.
Mm-hmm.
So how does Kev navigate this?
He does it by actively choosing not to act.
Yes. He doesn't impose his will. He creates a void of aggression, allowing the swan to dictate the terms of engagement.
And this is where we really have to look closely at animal ethology.
Okay, break that down for us.
In the wild, sudden movement from a larger creature is universally interpreted as predatory.
That makes total sense.
So by remaining entirely static, Kev is broadcasting non-hostility.
He's overriding his human instinct to just reach out and fix the problem with his hands.
Right. He's communicating safety through stillness.
And the swan accepts the invitation in a way that just defies logic.
It's an incredible submission.
Kev says the swan swims behind him, moving around to his back, and then positions itself perfectly underneath his right arm.
Wow.
I want to really analyze the mechanics of this. It's almost like a patient in an emergency room willingly exposing a wound to a surgeon.
That is exactly what it is.
The swan is taking its most vulnerable anatomy, its tangled neck, its compromised wings, and placing them directly into the immediate blind spot grasp of an apex predator.
It's just an ultimate act of physical surrender.
But is it an astonishing display of cross-species trust? Or is it a highly calculated, desperate gamble by an animal that knows its biological clock is ticking?
That is the perfect question. We often project human concepts of trust onto wildlife.
Sure, we do that all the time.
But from an evolutionary biology standpoint, this swan has performed a complex calculus.
The pain of the entanglement finally outweighed the fear of the human.
Exactly. The chronic, agonizing stress of the situation has simply overpowered its acute instinctual fear.
The bird has essentially developed learned helplessness regarding the fishing line.
And it is overriding millions of years of prey drive to seek an external solution.
I love that distinction so much. It isn't a Disney movie. It is an animal operating at the absolute razor edge of its survival parameters.
Death for death.
And notice how Kev's internal neurological state immediately mirrors the swan's physical surrender.
Oh, yeah.
He says, I didn't think about it. I just knew I had to do what I needed to do. He completely drops the threat assessment.
He has entered what we call a state of transient hypofrontality.
Transient hypofrontality. What does that mean in simple terms?
This is the neurological mechanism behind what athletes and artists call the flow state.
Oh, I've heard of the flow state.
Yeah, so the prefrontal cortex, which is the part of the brain responsible for calculating risk, worrying about the future, and analyzing potential arm-breaking scenarios.
It just turns off.
It temporarily downregulates. Blood flow shifts away from this analytical center and floods into the basal ganglia and motor cortex.
Because Kev's brain recognizes that overthinking will result in jerky, anxious movements.
Exactly, movements that could spook the bird.
So it simply shuts the analytical engine off, allowing procedural memory and deep, intuitive calm to take over.
It's fascinating how our brains protect us and enable us in a crisis.
It really is. And he even takes the deliberate, physical action of putting his fishing rod down into the rod rest.
That microscopic detail is so important.
Isn't it? He is officially clocking out of his human hobby. He is prioritizing the living, breathing crisis under his arm.
So let's break down the physical mechanics of this 5-minute rescue.
Yes, let's. Because the sequence of events requires a level of cooperative synchronization that is deeply anomalous in the wild.
It happens in 3 distinct phases.
Right. Phase 1 is the beak and the neck.
Kev has to untangle the monofilament line from right around the swan's mouth.
And he specifically mentions checking carefully to ensure there aren't any hooks attached that might tear the tissue.
He is operating with the precision of a bomb disposal expert.
Literally. His unprotected hands are just inches from a beak that could blind him.
And the mitigation of secondary damage here is paramount.
Because of the fishing line itself, right?
Yes. Monofilament line is notoriously dangerous. It's nearly invisible and possesses extremely high tensile strength.
So if he messes up,
If Kev pulls a strand that is attached to a buried barbed hook, the resulting sharp pain would instantly trigger the bird's sympathetic nervous system.
the fight or flight response would explode.
Exactly, terminating the interaction violently.
The fact that the swan permits this proximate, tactile examination of its head without flinching,
It indicates it is continually suppressing its own panic responses.
it's blowing my mind.
Hmm.
Then we move to phase 2, which elevates this from passive tolerance to active participation.
This is where it gets even more incredible.
After clearing the neck, Kev needs to get the line off the wing. And he emphasizes that the bird actually lifted its wing so he could look underneath it,
It is physically aiding in its own rescue.
which requires an astronomical level of situational awareness.
It does. The bird isn't merely enduring the human's presence. It actually understands the trajectory of the human's intention.
It recognizes that Kev needs access to the underside of the wing to alleviate the pressure.
And it adjusts its own biomechanics to facilitate that access.
Wow. And then we reach phase 3.
The climax of the rescue.
Exactly. Kev explicitly calls this the amazing moment. The swan stretches out its wing to intentionally imbalance itself in the water.
To intentionally unbalance itself, that's huge.
It is. It deliberately tips its own body just to reveal its leg, which is hidden deep under the water, where even more line is trapped.
And it allowed Kev to physically take its leg to remove the line.
Right. Consider the physics of a water bird for a second.
Right. A swan's survival is predicated on buoyancy and a perfectly maintained center of gravity.
They have those specialized glands, don't they?
Yes, glands that secrete oil to waterproof their feathers. It traps a layer of air against their body that keeps them afloat and insulated.
So by intentionally stretching a wing out and shifting its weight,
The swan is voluntarily sabotaging its own hydrostatic equilibrium,
it's literally rolling its body, exposing its underbelly and its leg.
which is its only mechanism for swimming away.
It is systematically dismantling every single layer of its physical defense.
It's incredible.
Kev estimates this entire operation took about 5 minutes. But his vocabulary describing the emotional weight of those 5 minutes is what really sticks with me.
What words did he use?
He uses words like surreal, peaceful, and serene. The contrast is just staggering. He is standing in the rushing heavy current of the River Trent, performing a highly dangerous untangling of a massive, stressed wild animal.
And yet, the pocket of space between them became entirely tranquil.
Exactly. Why does that happen?
Well, when transient hypofrontality is engaged, subjective time perception warps.
So the external stimuli just fade.
Yeah, the roar of the huge river, his son watching from the bank, the ambient temperature of the water, all of it fades from conscious processing.
It's just him and the bird.
The shared intention of the rescue creates a localized, isolated biorhythm between the two organisms.
The human's heart rate likely synchronized with the controlled breathing of the bird.
It's a very real physiological phenomenon.
And once the final piece of line is removed, Kev does something that shows a profound, ingrained respect for the ecosystem.
Oh, with the leftover fishing line.
Yes. He doesn't just toss the tangled ball of deadly plastic back into the current,
No, he puts it securely in his pocket to take home to the trash bin.
which is such a crucial closing act of responsibility.
Because tossing it back would simply reset the trap for the next animal.
Right. By pocketing the line, he removes the human-introduced hazard from the environment entirely, completely closing the ethical loop of the rescue.
It's the perfect ending to that physical interaction.
And the departure of the swan is incredibly graceful. It doesn't thrash in terror now that it's free.
Which you might expect once the adrenaline fades.
Yeah, but instead, it swims off peacefully, hangs around in the water just in front of Kev for a little while.
Almost like a thank you.
Right. And then slowly disappears up the vast river. Kev is left standing waist-deep, completely stunned by what the animal just permitted him to do.
And at this point, the crisis has resolved. The external threat of the fishing line is gone.
So what happens to Kev's brain now?
Consequently, his flow state collapses. The prefrontal cortex powers back online. Blood flow returns to the analytical centers of the brain.
And suddenly, he is left with the overwhelming psychological task of making sense of it all.
Because the event fundamentally violates the established rules of nature.
And you see him immediately trying to build a narrative to explain what just happened the minute he gets back to the car with his son.
Right, they debrief on the car ride home.
The son's reaction is deeply intellectual. He calls the event fascinating.
Which is a very logical way to look at it.
But Kev is grappling with something much heavier. He verbalizes his awe, telling his son, it was like it kind of knew that I was going to help it and I was not going to be a threat.
He is desperately searching for a vocabulary to explain an interspecies understanding.
Yeah. And then he admits to something really vulnerable. He admits to romanticizing the event.
How so?
He tells his son that maybe if they return to that stretch of the river, they might see the swan again, and it might recognize him.
Oh, that's really profound.
It makes you ask a philosophical questions, right? Why do we, as humans, feel such a strong urge to be remembered by nature?
It's a great question. Let's analyze that urge through the lens of evolutionary psychology.
Let's do it. Is it just ego?
Not necessarily. E.O. Wilson popularized the biophilia hypothesis.
Biophilia?
Yes, which suggests that humans possess an innate, biologically driven tendency to seek connections with nature and other forms of life.
That makes sense.
For the vast majority of human history, our survival depended on an intimate, almost symbiotic understanding of the animal behavior around us.
So we are hardwired to seek relationship with the ecosystem.
Exactly.
So it isn't just an ego trip. It isn't just Kev wanting to feel like the special human who tamed the beast.
No, it's a deep-seated craving for a permanent bond.
It's a tragic, vestigial craving, almost. Because modern humans are incredibly isolated.
We really are.
We live in concrete boxes, stare at digital screens, and our interactions with wildlife are usually limited to pests or pets.
So true.
When a massive wild creature suddenly bridges that chasm and interacts with us as a partner rather than a predator or prey.
Our brain desperately wants that bridge to remain permanently open.
We want the swan to remember us because it validates our deep ancestral feeling that we actually belong in this world.
Precisely. The memory of the event serves as proof of integration.
But a memory alone eventually degrades, doesn't it?
It does. The human mind requires a framework of meaning to sustain the psychological weight of the encounter.
Which brings us out of the flashback, out of the car ride, and all the way back to the modern day.
Back to the morning walk on the riverbank.
Yes, the morning Kev is recording the video. He goes home after his river walk before recording anything and decides to do a quick internet search.
Right, because the memory isn't enough. His curiosity compels him to search for a deeper symbolic framework.
He wants to know the spiritual significance of swans. He's just indulging that old romantic biophilia we talked about.
But what he finds is astonishing.
The information he uncovers on his screen completely floors him. He says he was absolutely gobsmacked.
Because the search engine results provide an incredibly specific historical and mythological framework.
And it perfectly maps onto his lived experience.
What exactly does he find?
He looks at the current calendar date, February 1st, and he discovers that today, the exact day the sound of the wings triggered the memory, the exact day he felt compelled to share the story,
Right.
is a pagan festival time called Imbolc.
Imbolc. Wow.
Yeah, and the details are just wild.
Well, Imbolc is a cross-quarter day in the Celtic wheel of the year.
What does that mean practically?
It sits exactly halfway between the winter solstice and the spring equinox. It is a literal astronomical marker of shifting light.
Kev's search breaks Imbolc down into 3 distinct elements, and it is startling how accurately they overlay onto his physical rescue story.
I'm really curious to hear these.
Okay, so the first element is that Imbolc is a transition between winter and spring.
A literal shift in seasons.
Right, but metaphorically representing Kev's shift in awareness. In the river, he transitioned from a pragmatic, transactional observer into a conduit of acute empathy.
And now, on February 1st, he is transitioning from simply possessing a memory to actively understanding its deeper resonance.
Exactly. The second element he uncovers is that Imbolc represents a time for rebirth.
In the historical context, this meant the lambing season and the first stirrings of agricultural life beneath the frost.
But in Kev's specific reality, the concept of rebirth is entirely literal.
Because of the rescue?
Yes. That swan was tethered to a slow, suffocating demise by the monofilament line. Through their synchronized interaction, the animal was freed from a death sentence.
It was physically pulled back from the brink.
And given a second iteration of its life.
That is incredibly powerful. What's the third element?
The third element is what ties the physical to the psychological. Imbolc is described as a time for love.
Okay, but we have to be careful not to view love purely through a romantic, human-centric lens here, right?
Absolutely. In the context of the River Trent, love is defined as the profound, boundary-crossing empathy required to execute the rescue.
It is the mutual suspension of terror in favor of compassion.
That 5-minute bubble of serenity where a wild bird and an apex predator synchronize their breathing to remove a deadly hazard.
That is the operational, mechanical definition of love for a living creature.
It really is. And the detail that acts as the linchpin for this entire narrative architecture is the symbol of the festival itself.
Oh, what is the symbol?
Kev reads that Imbolc, with all its themes of astronomical transition, physical rebirth, and empathetic love, is heavily symbolized by the swan.
You are kidding.
Nope. The very creature that initiated the memory on the exact day dedicated to its mythological significance.
It's the kind of narrative loop that shorts out the human brain's pattern recognition software.
Totally. It's no wonder Kev looks into the camera and asks his audience 3 escalating, deeply philosophical questions.
What were the questions?
He asks, is that a coincidence? Is it synchronicity? Is it divine intervention?
Those 3 concepts represent the spectrum of human sense-making when confronted with statistical anomalies.
I would love for you to meticulously break down those 3 tiers of meaning.
Gladly. Let's analyze the mechanics of each. The first tier, coincidence, implies a random, mathematically possible, but entirely meaningless collision of independent variables.
So swans exist in Nottingham. Kev has a memory of one. Today happens to be February 1st.
Exactly. From a strict rationalist perspective, the human brain, which is basically an aggressive pattern-matching engine, is simply connecting random data points to soothe its own existential anxiety.
But then you look at the second tier, synchronicity, which changes the mechanics entirely.
Synchronicity is a term coined by the Swiss psychiatrist Carl Jung.
I've heard of Jungian synchronicity, but I've never fully grasped it.
He often discussed it in collaboration with the quantum physicist Wolfgang Pauli. Jung defined it as a causal connecting principle.
A causal, meaning without a cause.
Right. It suggests that events can be meaningfully connected by their emotional or symbolic resonance, rather than strict cause and effect.
Okay, I think I see. So the date of February 1st didn't physically cause the swan's wings to make a sound.
And the sound didn't cause the calendar date?
But their intersection in Kev's mind holds a profound psychological significance.
Yes. It is the idea of the universe rhyming an alignment between the internal psychological state of the observer and the external reality of the environment.
The universe rhyming. That is a beautiful way to phrase it.
And then you move to the third tier, divine intervention.
Which removes the concept of chance entirely.
Correct. It implies the existence of an active, conscious, higher power or architecture that deliberately guided Kev's thoughts to the swan on that exact day.
Specifically to deliver a message about transition.
Right. But what is most psychologically healthy about Kev's conclusion is his refusal to force a definitive answer.
He asks the questions, but he doesn't demand epistemological certainty. He just says, who knows?
He allows the mystery to remain a mystery.
Instead of getting bogged down, improving the theology, or calculating the mathematical probability, he focuses entirely on the emotional and physiological result.
He says, it made me smile.
Yeah, made me smile. He takes this intensely personal, dangerous standoff in the river and transmutes it into a universal directive for his audience.
A universal takeaway.
He hopes everyone watching enjoys February 1st, and he asks them to recognize that This, too, is a transition for us all.
Using the framework of Imbolc and the Swan to remind us that life is perpetually shifting.
Even when we feel stuck in the deep winter of our own routines.
Exactly. If we synthesize the architecture of this entire deep dive, the trajectory is truly remarkable.
It really is a massive journey.
We began with the neuroscience of an auditory trigger, the low-frequency thrum of wings, bypassing the conscious brain to unlock a dormant file.
Which pulled us right into the fluid dynamics of the River Trent.
Where a wild animal overrode millions of years of prey instinct to perform a calculated gamble for survival.
We examined the transient hypofrontality that allowed a human to operate with surgical serenity inside a high-stakes crisis.
And finally, we explored how the human need for ecological connection drove a search for meaning.
Culminating in the Jungian synchronicity of the Imbolc festival.
It is a massive testament to the power of stepping back.
Of intentionally choosing not to force the issue, not grabbing the net, and simply creating a quiet space for nature and life itself to reveal its vulnerabilities on its own terms.
The overarching lesson is that sometimes the most effective intervention is the deliberate suspension of our own instinct to control the environment.
I couldn't agree more. As we close out this deep dive, I want to leave you with a concept to process on your own time.
A final thought to mull over.
Exactly. Given Kev's conclusion that life is full of transitions, and that these pivotal shifts are happening all around us if we train ourselves to notice them.
What should we be looking for?
Think about the invisible fishing line operating in your own life right now. What are the hidden, complex tangles holding you or someone in your immediate orbit back?
That's a powerful visual.
If a season of transition is approaching, are you quiet enough and observant enough to notice who might be silently swimming up to you, asking for help to untangle it?
Or flipping the dynamic entirely.
Whose right arm do you need to intentionally swim beneath to finally find your own release?
A vital framework for navigating the inherent complexities of both our internal psychology and our external connections.
Thank you so much for joining us for this deep dive into Kev's incredible encounter. We encourage you to stay curious, keep your auditory and visual awareness open to the natural world moving around you, and as Kev would wish for you, have a fabulous day.